All right, we're on day 26 and we're in Acts chapter 2. Now, we're going to talk about the day of Pentecost, and you might recognize that word if you've ever heard of Pentecostal churches. You'll see where all of that comes from. Acts chapter 2, it says, on the day of Pentecost, all the believers were meeting together in one place. Now, the day of Pentecost was one of the Jewish holidays. You can read more about that if you just Google it, or if you read some of the Old Testament, you'll see what that ritual, that ceremony was all about. But anyway, here the disciples are. They're Jewish, so they're celebrating this festival. And then this crazy thing happens. Everyone that is present was filled with the Holy Spirit, and they started speaking in other languages as the Holy Spirit gave them this ability. So you can imagine how strange this must have been to them. Tongues of fire appear on their head, and this really miraculous thing happens to them, and they're speaking in languages that they don't even know. They didn't study. They never learned these languages. And it says that at that time there were devout Jews from every nation living there in Jerusalem, and they were bewildered to hear their own languages being spoken by the believers, by this small group of Jesus followers. So they didn't understand what was going on. Again, they're all there in Jerusalem to celebrate this day of Pentecost. Some of them are followers of Jesus. Some of them are just, sort of regular run-of-the-mill Jewish people who had gathered for this important festival. And here's what they heard in their own words. They said, "We all hear these people," talking about the disciples of Jesus, "speaking in our own languages about the wonderful things that God has done." So apparently when the languages came to the disciples, little did they know what they were saying, but they were telling people about Jesus. They were telling people about what Jesus did. They were basically praising God, the God of the Bible, in other languages. And so on the heels of that, and again, you can read this for yourself, Peter ends up stepping forward. You can imagine that this got everyone's attention. Peter steps forward and preaches his very first sermon ever. And the end of the sermon says this. He says, "So let everyone in Israel know for certain that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, to be both Lord and Messiah." So probably what happened is the messages in all those other languages were kind of sermons, their own little sermons, and now Peter speaks a sermon in a language that kind of they all commonly understood. He finishes the sermon by saying, "Turn to Jesus and you can be saved." And so many of them did, and it says that those who believed what Peter said were baptized and added to the church that day, about 3,000 in all. So pretty amazing sort of first day. And I want you to just, as you read this for yourself, I want you to think of this like this. This was the beginning of the church. This was the beginning of the movement of the followers of Jesus. And remember that the church at this point was a Jewish thing. Remember, this was a Jewish ceremony, the Feast of Pentecost. All the people who were there who came to faith, all 3,000 of them had Jewish background, right? And so at this point, Jesus was a Jewish carpenter. All the disciples were Jewish. At this point in Acts chapter 2, Christianity was definitely like a Jewish movement. Now that's going to change as you read through the book of Acts and the entire New Testament, because it turns out the message of Jesus isn't just for Jews. It's for the whole world. And that's probably why this miraculous speaking in tongues thing happened, because God wanted the message, God wanted the gospel to be shared in every language.